Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 29th, 2026. Today, we're going to take a look at the tropics in the Atlantic and what does the future hold? Could we potentially be looking at development chances as we head into early August here in the Western Atlantic? Well, the talk of that has sparked up a little bit, especially over the last day on social media, and I'll show you who are some of the people that are saying it. And of course, we're going to take a look at the worldwide tropics, including the Pacific too, which has super typhoon Dolphin, which is really ramping up and is now a beauty of a typhoon. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. So, with that being said, let's get started by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center. And right now in the Atlantic, over the next 7 days, nothing is expected to develop. So as we close the month of July here, we should be closing on a quiet note. No areas of interest noted in the Atlantic right now. In the Eastern Pacific, though, things are obviously still quiet. We have two areas here. One of them is Fausto, which is now a post-tropical system, so I guess this doesn't really count anymore. This is moving straight on off to the north of Hawaii. No impacts are likely going to be felt here in the island chain as Fausto is being blasted by shear and it is really no longer a tropical cyclone. So no need to worry about Fausto if you are in Hawaii, except for maybe an occasional shower or two. And I'll show you how it looks like on the satellite in just a little bit. And then we have Hurricane Genevieve, which is also dying right now. It is down to a Category 2 with winds of 100 miles per hour with a minimum pressure of 970 millibars, and that is going to also move off to sea here and not really be of any threat to any land, and of course continue to fizzle out as well after having a pretty good run at hitting Category 5 intensity as well. So we have two Category 5s here that have now occurred in the Pacific, including Typhoon Dolphin, in just the matter of the last week here. Really just goes to show how active the Pacific is right now, and it's definitely no surprise given the product that we have because of the Super El Nino, and we'll of course talk about that as well. Here's a satellite shot though of what is going on across the Atlantic. Nothing much happening right now, and things are nice and quiet. There are a few tropical waves here in the Eastern Atlantic, and there's definitely a wave that is moving off the coast of Africa as well. And we've seen that from time to time this season. Some of these aggressive-looking tropical waves which would come off the coast of Africa and then splash down in the Eastern Atlantic and then immediately fizzle out. And this wave here as well in the Eastern Atlantic kind of looked menacing too as it was just coming off the coast of Africa. But thanks to the unfavorable conditions that we have across the deep tropics right now, dry air, which is definitely keeping a lid on allowing any sort of major or organized convection, and of course wind shear, which is being imparted by El Nino. There is nothing in particular that looks aggressive right now in terms of development. Pretty much anywhere in the basin. We do have a front which is moving off the coast of the U.S. And it brought quite a bit of rain, and it is still bringing quite a bit of rain to the Northeast today. But especially to the Mid-Atlantic as well yesterday, although that is moving on off to the north and should kind of get on out of here. And then we have some showers and thunderstorms across the southeast, some occurring over Florida, and then some occurring over the Gulf here, although nothing, again, looking very imminent to develop right now. Here's a look, though, over Africa, because obviously, all of our energy or our main source of energy for tropical development in the Atlantic comes from Africa. It comes from these tropical easterly waves, which get their origins in eastern Africa near Ethiopia, and then eventually they move on off to the west here and eventually move off the coast of Africa, and if conditions allow, they develop at some point in the MDR, or sometimes, of course, we've had cases where tropical waves would, not really do much in the MDR, or maybe they would try to develop, but they struggle until they end up finding favorable conditions further out to the west. And sometimes that'll either be in the western MDR, in the Gulf, off the southeast coast, or in the eastern Pacific too. But the reason why I want to show you what's going on over Africa right now, because you could see there's definitely quite a bit of energy here. There's obviously a wave which is, probably going to move off the coast of Africa here in about a day or so. Another wave following right behind that, and then there's another wave here over Central Eastern Africa, and then probably another one that's getting started and building over Far Eastern Africa. So I find it very interesting that the amount of energy and the amount of tropical waves we have right now is definitely very active. The wave train has been pretty consistent this year. And as I've said before, we've had multiple strong tropical waves over the last month or so, which have definitely caught my eye, not in terms of development, but because of the fact that they look very aggressive, that have moved off the coast of Africa. But I think this really should just highlight just how unfavorable the Atlantic is right now, although you do have to give credit to climatology as well. We are still in late July. We typically don't really start seeing any increased chances of development in the MDR, especially in the eastern Atlantic with these tropical waves, until we really get to about early August. So, starting next week, maybe we'll have to watch a little bit more. And I'll actually show you the model ensembles in a little bit. But the energy is there, but it's just nothing is developing yet, because once again, conditions in the Atlantic are not that favorable. And even taking a look at the actual active waves across the tropics right now, there's definitely quite a bit of them. There's, again, a wave in the eastern Atlantic, obviously emerged off the coast of Africa about a day or so. And then there's another wave here in the central western MDR, and that's going to continue to move on off to the west. And then there's a wave in the eastern Caribbean, and then also one in the western Caribbean about to enter into the eastern Pacific. And then there's one here as well that is still traceable all the way into the eastern Pacific too. And, sometimes these tropical waves supply pulses of energy, which then are able to sprout into eastern Pacific storms. And I think that's probably already happened this year so far. But again, none of these waves are expected to develop, at least within the next few days. But you would think that as we start to get into August, and, despite the fact that we are dealing with a super El Nino here, so the base state of the atmosphere will definitely not permit for really a lot of development in the deep tropics, especially this year. But you would think as we get into early August, climatology-wise, maybe one of these waves would eventually fight back and try to find favorable conditions, whether it be in the far eastern Atlantic. Sometimes we actually get that in El Nino years. We can get some development that occurs in the far eastern Atlantic, or maybe something that'll try to resurrect in the western Atlantic. And maybe that's a little bit of foreshadowing what I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But regardless, right now, none of these waves are expected to develop, and things, at least over the next week, remain pretty nice and quiet and non-threatening from the Atlantic standpoint. Moving on to the Pacific, though, taking a look at how the Pacific looks like right now, definitely quite a bit of energy active out there. You could probably see this is the pulse associated with the tropical wave that I just mentioned in the Eastern Pacific, although not really looking likely to develop. Then we have Hurricane Genevieve here, a nice, large hurricane, although it is moving on off to the northwest here into cooler sea surface temperatures, so it's beginning to die down and fizzle out. Definitely not as organized as a few days ago when it had that beautiful eye and a well-defined and well-rounded CDO. Now it's looking like it's kind of getting sheared, and it's kind of struggling to maintain its structure, and that's expected given that it's moving into more unfavorable conditions right now. But quite a bit of activity here in the Eastern Pacific still. And then moving on into the Central Pacific, lots of activity right now, convective-wise, especially throughout the ITCZ here in the tropical Pacific. And as I mentioned before, a hallmark of very strong El Nino, lots of convective activity here in the ITCZ. Obviously, that being a product of all of the rising motion and favorability we have in the atmosphere, once again, because of the El Nino, but nothing looking, imminent to develop right now. But then you could also see here just to the north of Hawaii, that is, yes, the corpse of Fausto. What was once a Hawaii threat, in typical Hawaii fashion, it ends up getting steered to the north and getting sheared to death. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Absolutely no activity or any sort of impacts being felt to northern Hawaii or whatsoever. There's literally no convection at all So it might be a little bit of a breezy day depending on where you are, but nothing major in terms of impact. So no need to worry here in terms of the tropics, at least for now. But different story here, especially when you go to the Western Pacific, and that is because we have Typhoon Dolphin. And once again, another product of the absolute insanity that the Western Pacific can produce. This is an absolutely beautiful storm. I mean, there's nothing much else to say other than to take a look at the picture here. The latest satellite loop, and this is the high res mesoscale floater satellite. So this, I believe, updates every 30 seconds or produces frames for every 30 seconds. So this really gives you more up to date pictures. And I mean, it's just incredible. We have a band which kind of extends all the way from the northeastern section and wraps in to the central dense overcast here, which is very well rounded and also very cool. And that's another feature that you see with these very strong super typhoons. They have these massive, very, very circular CDOs, as well as a very circular eye. About as perfect as you could get when it comes to typhoons and tropical cyclones in general. And this is probably because of that pushing high-end Category 5 status. Wouldn't be surprised if this is 175, maybe even 180 miles per hour right now. And this might undergo an eye wall replacement cycle and weaken a little bit, but this has quite a few days ahead of it of probably weakening and then re-intensifying, and every single time it re-intensifies after an eye wall replacement cycle, it's probably going to grow even larger and even more beautiful here. And you can take a look at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center forecast for the next 5 days, and they certainly expect this to intensify. They expect this to become 180 miles per hour, which is 155 knots because the official Joint Typhoon Warning Center is in knots. So they forecast 155 knots again, up to 180 miles per hour. But I wouldn't be surprised, again, looking at this official satellite shot, that it is already 180 miles per hour. But the analysis here from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center tends to be a little bit conservative. But I think at some point they will officially analyze this as a 180 mile per hour system. And it's definitely going to have many days to be able to do so. And again, it'll probably be continuously going through eye wall replacement cycles, and it will weaken a little bit and then intensify once again. And then eventually this will kind of bend off to the west here. And it is very far down the line, but beyond the 7-day time frame. I believe I mentioned this yesterday and in the update as well from the day before. But anywhere from Japan to China to maybe even Korea, we'll have to watch for potential impacts very far down the line with Dolphin. But again, that is beyond 7 to 10 days. Lots of uncertainty right now, and definitely something we will be watching here long term. So with that being said, let's start taking a look at the models here. Starting off in the Pacific, moving on with the Eastern Pacific right now on the GFS. After Genevieve gets on out of here, things are actually going to kind of quiet down for a little bit in the Eastern Pacific. You would think that activity would, continue, and we would be producing a train of hurricanes right now, but looks like things are actually going to cool down for a little bit. Although do not expect this to be long lasting. That's probably just going to be a week or so of maybe a lull in activity. But the base state is still very favorable, and it's just a matter of actually getting a spark to be able to consolidate. And when we do actually get something that will actually try to develop, believe me, it'll take off, and we will probably see activity once again increase, especially as we head into August. And the Eastern Pacific already starts getting active by the time we get to July, but like the Atlantic, we tend to see the peak of activity, especially in August and September in the Eastern Pacific. So best believe things are really going to heat up here eventually. Moving on to the Western Pacific to show you what's going to happen here with Dolphin. And as I mentioned before, it's going to continue to move on off to the west-northwest here. Eventually, it's going to make a bend off to the west, and that should roughly happen at around 5 days or so now. And then eventually, this is going to probably aim for maybe southern Japan. And the models today, though, seem to be a little bit more certain that we're going to start to see this bend off to the west and probably aim directly at China But again, before it actually starts approaching any sort of land, it's still going to be beyond the 7-day time frame, though. So there's still lots of uncertainty and lots of room for change. And you can see here the GFS on this run ends up taking this towards China, and we end up getting a landfall as what looks like a pretty powerful system here, roughly about 10 days out. 10 days out, so that's a long time. We could still see some shifts to the south. We could see a shift and track back to the north here. There's still lots of uncertainty, so anywhere from Japan to Korea to China, and including Taiwan and maybe even the northern Philippines, need to keep a close eye on Dolphin. And beyond Dolphin, kind of just a testament to how active the Pacific is going to be here, there might be another storm that develops on its periphery, probably associated with this monsoon trough setup that'll develop here in the Pacific, and that does something a little funky here. But we expect all kinds of funky things, especially in a year like this in the Pacific. So they will definitely have their hands full here for at least the next 1 to 2 weeks, and you can imagine it's going to continue beyond that. All right, so yeah, now we're on to the Atlantic here with the models. And I want to start off by looking at the long-range AI ensembles here from the Google AI plots, and you can see nothing solid right now over the next 2 weeks, but there are a few signals here of potentially maybe, 1 or 2 of these aggressive waves like I mentioned before. We keep on getting these aggressive, interesting-looking waves that move off the coast of Africa here in the eastern Atlantic. Most of them fizzle out, but as we get towards the month of August, you would think that 1 or 2 of these waves might try to develop, so maybe that's what the AI here is indicating at a little bit. But I'd say the main area that looks interesting here, and this especially starts to happen around 7 to 10 days out, is in the Western Atlantic. And it is more than just one ensemble here showing some activity. There's one, just to the east of the Bahamas that becomes a interesting looking storm. And then there's also a few ensembles here in the Gulf. So there's definitely a signal for early August in terms of development, and it's not unheard of. And climatology wise, the Western Atlantic, anywhere from, off the southeast coast to the Gulf, is favored anyways. And that signal here is actually represented pretty nicely on the GFS, and I think it actually kind of started with the GFS, and I'll show you why I say that in a little bit. But let's run the GFS out in time here. Nothing happens really over the next week, but then you start to notice here there's this interesting piece of energy that begins to develop roughly around 7 days out, passes just to the north of the Caribbean, and then you kind of see it reflected here nearing the Bahamas. And then there's also some sort of piece of energy as well that tries to spin up in the Gulf. So there's definitely some energy that the models are latching onto in early August. Nothing is set in stone right now, though, because what we're talking about is around 7 to 10 days out. But part of the reason why this really began to spark a little bit of interest is because the GFS has been actually showing this for a few runs now. And I'll take you to the 60 run to show you what I mean. You can see here, piece of energy on the GFS. And then on the 60 run, it actually tried to consolidate a little bit here off the southeast coast, although this is, getting into beyond day 10 time frame, so you can't really take this seriously. But what was probably even more interesting was the 0Z run of the GFS, which actually developed this into a pretty decent looking storm. That's probably even a hurricane here, roughly within the 7 to 10 time frame. Right off the southeast coast. So the GFS has actually been consistently showing some sort of piece of energy here for the last 2 or 3 model runs. And it's still here on the 12Z run, although probably much more closer to reality with, not much developing instead of the GFS, developing a hurricane here off the southeast coast. Although it's not super unreasonable to expect a hurricane around that time, around early August. It's much more typical and much more in line with climatology, but we will see what happens here. Nothing is set in stone. These are kind of just small little model signals that are just beginning to appear right now, but clearly it was enough for people to start talking about it on social media, because Andy Hazelton actually made a tweet about this earlier this morning, and he does mention it. He actually mentions the GFS, and he also brings up the AI and even the European ensembles as well. He mentions the Atlantic continues to look pretty quiet. One small feature that might be worth watching in 5 days is a trough split, where a piece of trough pinches off under the upper ridge and moves to the west. So basically what he's talking about here is the origin of this system is some sort of piece of energy that splits from a trough in the subtropics and kind of moves on off to the west here. And then he says that sometimes these can result in a surface low forming, but it takes a while because the upper level winds from the upper level low tend to shear the convection. And so we will see what happens. But sometimes you have to pay attention to these model signals here when it comes to development. And let me close that tab because there's nothing to talk about there. But and especially in a year like this, the main sources of energy that we will probably be watching for the most are, things like these that are non-tropical pieces of energy that end up finding a little bit of a spark and blossoming from there in the Western Atlantic. And that is generally the kind of pattern that I had in mind for most of this hurricane season so far. So when you kind of factor that idea in, that gives me a little bit of interest here that we might have to watch for something in the Western Atlantic early August. But for now, things are looking nice and quiet. No immediate threats here in the next week. So enjoy it while it lasts. But of course, continue to watch the tropics here. And of course, we will be continuing to do so and seeing if anything does indeed pop up. But with that being said, that's going to wrap it up for today's tropical weather outlook. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, I would really appreciate if you like this video. Comment any thoughts you have or any questions you have below. I'll definitely try to answer them. And subscribe to the channel if you want to, as I'll be doing these videos on a daily basis, as I have been doing. So if you're interested in that, please make sure to stay tuned, as I'll have a lot for you over the coming weeks as hurricane season continues. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to you all. I'll be back with more tomorrow.